Hello and welcome. Hello and welcome to our webinar, How to Get Your Board Engaged in and Excited About Fundraising. I know this is a topic of concern for a lot of folks. And before we get started, I just want to make sure everything technical is working right. So I'm going to just take a moment to figure out how the comments work so that hopefully you can comment during the webinar. I just need to double check where it is on the screen so I can get you all that information. Looking forward to jumping into this really quickly. In case you haven't noticed, you will need to hit the play button, but of course if you haven't hit the play button, I'm not sure if you can actually hear what I'm saying. And there's a little contact box at the bottom of the screen, which is not working. I'm going to see if I can change one of the settings. Let's see, thank you for bearing with me. There we go, everything is on the screen. But the comments that should be showing up, the comment box is not there. So we are going to go ahead and proceed without it. And if somebody wouldn't mind sending me a quick email to confirm that yes, you can hear what I am saying, and then I will go ahead and jump in. You can just reply right back to that email that I sent you. Okay, can you hear me? Someone there? Okay, Vicky, thank you. Okay, we will barrel on forward then. Just want to make sure everything's technically working and then we can wrap it up from there. Just make sure to hit the play button so that you can watch the webinar. And this is kind of a new experience for me. This is the first time using this platform. I appreciate your patience as we figure out the details. So what we're going to be talking about again today is getting your board engaged in and excited about fundraising. And this is one of those topics that's so much easier said than done. And it's one of those topics that every board that I've talked to has struggled with in one way or another. Even those boards that we look at and we're jealous of because it looks like they have everything together, they struggle with these issues too in some ways that maybe we can't see. So one of those huge topics. And there's so many things that go beyond it. And so after let's see, I started working with boards and in nonprofits about 20 years ago. January will be the 20-year celebration for me, so I haven't decided what I'm going to do to celebrate yet, but it has to be something fun. And so what I've done is reviewed my mental file of all the boards that I've worked with over the last 20 years and tried to boil it down into a few categories of things that organizations struggle with and things that get in the way of getting boards engaged in fundraising. And so what I've done is identify about 5, 6 different buckets of knowledge that we need to have if we're going to be successful about engaging our board in fundraising. And then I use those as the basis of putting together a 7-step program that we can walk our boards through that will help get through that initial resistance to doing something different. And so I'll be reviewing that. And really quick before we get into it, I'll go ahead and list out those 7 steps. The first one is creating a compelling vision, because without a vision, it's hard for people to get excited, it's hard for them to move forward. The second stage is drafting a simple fundraising plan. It's much easier to start if you have something in mind at first about what people will do. Now, you'll have your overall fundraising plan for the organization and then a special plan that's just for the board, and so that part comes later. This first part is being clear and having something in writing about your fundraising plan. And hopefully you have that put together already. The third step is developing your messaging. And this is important because a lot of organizations they might have 12 different board members, 20 different board members, and if every single board member is telling a different story, then it's hard to get the benefit of a consistent message going out into the community. So the more that we can help create that consistent message, the more likely people are to remember the organization and the more likely they are to move on it. The fourth step is creating a pitch kit that your board members can use, including, and I'll go over these in a little more detail at the end. The pitch kit includes a donation form, scripts, sample letters, the case statement, all sorts of information that the board members can use to make it easier to raise money. Number 5, facilitating a fundraising planning session with your board where they're part of making the decisions. Because if they're not part of the process of deciding what to do, they're going to have a lot less ownership in the outcome and what you're asking them to do. So the more that we can get them on board and really feel like a partner in the development of everything, the better we'll be. 6 is training your board to ask. A lot of board members and a lot of nonprofit staff too are afraid about talking about money, afraid of asking for a gift. So if we can provide a little training, it helps make it a little more comfortable for them. And then of course ongoing checking in so that your board members don't check out. It's easy to get intimidated by the process and by all sorts of new things to do. So the more that we can be there as a support for our board members, the more likely they are to continue moving forward. And it might feel like nagging at first, but really it's checking in, making sure things are okay, seeing how you can help them do the things that they've already said that they would do. And one hint with that is if each person fills out their own personal board member fundraising plan, then you're following up on that rather than harping on, hey, all our board members need to do this and why aren't you doing it? Instead, the conversation starts with, hey, these are the things that you suggested that you'd be able to help on. How is that going and how can I help you accomplish those? It changes the dynamic of that conversation, which is really important. But again, I'll go into that a little deeper at the end. So to give an overview of what we're going to talk about today, first of all, it's really important, I think, and from my experience of seeing, that collaboration is really, really important. It's about coming together, accomplishing something as a team, really working together to do fun and exciting things. So we're going to talk a little bit about why is it important to collaborate. We're going to talk about the different team members and the roles that they play. We'll talk about the 5 different knowledge base areas that I talked about earlier, plus a 6th one that overlaps with a couple of the areas but isn't really covered specifically. And then, of course, that going more in depth into those 7 steps. Now, it's a lot of information to cover, and obviously we only have an hour together, so I won't be able to share everything. But what I am in the process of doing, and you might be interested in this, some organizations are going to be able to take this information and run with it. That's great. Some organizations might need a little more help and a little more resources, a few more resources to help. So I'm putting together a 7-module program where we'll have one module that includes sample PowerPoint presentations, the handouts, the timelines for trainings, forms in a Word format so that you can easily just change the names and print it out and use it. So it's a package of information to help you get through this process a lot easier. So if you're one of those organizations who can take this and run with it, great. Do that. But if you're one of those organizations that might need a little help, I promise to cover some more information about that at the end so that you'll have some more resources. But before we get started into that, it's important that you know a little bit about who you're listening to, who you're talking to, and if you've seen me on one of my trainings before, or participated in a webinar, you probably know a lot about me and what I do. But just to share, I spent, I guess it was 10 summers growing up at a camp with for kids with physical disabilities, and this is a picture of me with my folks at the camp. So I was introduced to nonprofits at a really young age. That's me in my mom's arms. I guess I must have been 2 or 3 years old in that picture. I don't know. But those were great memories growing up. My brother's in the picture too. He was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, I think a year after that picture was taken, or it might have been right before. And so it was really neat that my mom was able to experience some kids who had special needs before she realized that her own son was one of those. But growing up at camp really helped me see people for who they are, for what they can contribute, rather than what they can't contribute. And it's probably a big reason why I'm always trying to help the underdog and help people succeed. And if somebody tells me that I can't do something, that's exactly what I'm going to do, because I'm not quite sure where that came from, but it's a drive within me. And I already mentioned I started working with nonprofits about 20 years ago. I was working on an undergraduate degree in social work, ended up doing my internship in a hospital foundation, of all places. But I fell in love with philanthropy, I fell in love with the donors, and now I help organizations of all sizes find the donors who are really passionate about what the organization does and help grow those long-term relationships. And that's just a lot of fun for me. So why collaboration? You've probably heard this before, but we're certainly better together. I don't know if you've read any of Robert Putnam's work on social capital and community building and things like that, but I do believe that we are truly better together, and I encourage you to read any of those social capital books when you get a chance. Also, and one of the reasons for that is to get a whole bunch of different perspectives, a bunch of different ideas. It's also having ownership from board members, from staff members, so that we can all work together. One experience that I had with an organization, the staff was really, really resistant to any idea of fundraising, and the board was somewhat as well. So by bringing everybody in a room together, by saying we're looking trying to seek out the win-win situations that we could find, trying to look and trying to make the assumption that everybody was in it for the good of the organization, for the good of the people that we were serving. And by having that assumption going into it, we were really able to build a feeling of collaboration. And that was important. And I think it made the process a lot more fun, too, and the ideas coming from different angles. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that you could add about why collaboration is important. And hopefully you believe that, because it's not, any of us can't do our work on our own. There's a lot of overlap when it comes to fundraising. We each have things that we're doing outside of fundraising, but we each have a role to play when it comes to fundraising as well. The staff, they contribute stories, because without program staff, we're not going to have stories to be able to share. And if you've been in fundraising for a while, you know that it's stories that really encourage people to make that gift. And then often people do look for the facts to back that up. But the decision to give is typically an emotional one. And without staff contributing stories, we're not going to have that. For some organizations, too, there might be other staff involved in gift processing or human resources. So if you're doing a staff giving campaign of some sort, and by the way, if you don't do one already, I strongly encourage that you start one. And the amount of the giving is not as important as staff members saying, hey, I believe in this cause and it's important to me. So if it's, even if it's $2 a pay period or $5 a pay period, whatever people can afford to give, that sends a strong message to the community, to the board members, to everybody about their role in fundraising. And plus, it makes them an investor rather than just a staff person. So it changes the dynamics of their relationship with the organization. So that's just one little bonus tip. The board, of course, they have their role outside of the organization. They're working, they're raising a family, they're doing whatever it is that they do when they're not at your board meetings and not involved with your organization. But their role is really being an ambassador for the organization out in the community. So if you have a board member who's sitting on 17 different boards, it's hard for them to be an ambassador for 17 different organizations. So just something to think about when you're recruiting board members. It's the quality that counts, not the quantity. So yeah, with your board members, make sure that they have the capacity, ability to be an ambassador when you're bringing them on board, and set the expectation up front that fundraising, making a personal contribution as well as being involved in the fundraising process in some sort, is an expectation. Now, there are some boards where really that doesn't apply at all. Maybe it's a board of people who are appointed to the role, or it's people who are sitting in their roles because of a role they play with another organization. That gets a little more complicated, and there's some other strategies to manage that dilemma. One of the easiest ways to do that is to establish a second committee or a council or some sort of entity that does have the role of raising money. Now, that's only if structurally the board members can't or won't get involved in fundraising. For most organizations, that isn't the case. But if you're in that unusual circumstance, then thinking about a secondary council or committee to be the advocates, to be the fundraisers, could be a way to go. And then, of course, the donors. They're involved with other organizations. They give to you, but all those different people and the roles that they play are important. And seeing donors as partners in the work that we're doing rather than just a source of income is important. So if we can look at it as a partnership with our donors where they have the passion, they want to make a difference in the community, and we're the vehicle, nonprofit organizations are a vehicle to help accomplish that. So one can't operate without the other. We can't do our mission without money to do it. And there was a blog post I saw I guess it was about a week ago, that donors have to give. It's a drive within them that they have to give. And the typical person who gives to about 7 different organizations. As a side note, the typical Presbyterian who gives to about 15 different organizations. And that's probably true of people in a lot of faith communities. Very, very generous. So to get into the knowledge base, there's 5 different things that I'm going to cover, plus the 6th one that's not really covered as much, change management. We have to know about the dynamics of change, how it impacts an organization, how people respond when change is thrust upon them, and I'll show some diagrams on that in a minute. Recognizing that we each have different communication styles, we each have different strengths, we each have different things that we're good at, recognizing what those are and seeing the value of each of those roles in a team is important. So communication styles is one of those things. Leadership and team building, knowing how to set a vision and bring people along, knowing how to build up a team and have a strong base of people who are committed to what you're doing. Of course, knowing about marketing, because if people don't know about an organization, they're not going to contribute to it. So we need to have a marketing base, and also fundraising, and that's a given. And hopefully everybody's on this call has some fundamental knowledge of fundraising, how it works, the process of connecting donors who have a passion with a project that they're going to be fulfilled by, and that's the core of it. The 6th thing that I didn't cover, that I didn't include here, but is kind of covered by some of the other areas, is learning theory. Because we each, when we're learning something new, it's this process and this system that we have to go through. The first phase of learning is unconscious incompetence. So that means we don't know what we don't know, so we're eagerly rushing forward saying, sure, I can do that. And this is what happens at a lot of board meetings when fundraising comes up. People think about it and they're like, oh yeah, that doesn't sound too hard, I can do that. So they raise their hand and say, yeah, put me down for that. Now, they get home, or maybe a couple days down the road, they start thinking about what that's going to look like. And all of a sudden, they realize, darn it, I don't know what I'm doing. And as an adult, that's a really uncomfortable place to be. Because as adults, it's harder to make mistakes. It's harder to look like we don't know what we're doing, because we always want to look like we have everything together, we know everything. And that's where we lose a lot of board members, when they get home and realize, darn it, I don't know what I'm doing. And then they push it off, and they push it off, and pretty soon it's the next board meeting, and you're meeting, and you're wondering, why hasn't anybody done what they said they do? And I know some of you are probably laughing because you've seen that exact thing happen. So the second phase is conscious incompetence. And that's where people hit the wall, when they realize they don't know what they do know what they don't know, and it scares them. So that second phase is conscious incompetence. The third phase they go through is conscious competence, where it takes some thinking, it takes some effort to do things and to learn new things, but it's becoming a little easier. And then the final phase is unconscious competence, where they're really good at it, they can teach it. These are the folks, once they get to that point, once a couple of your board members get to that point, pair them up with new people who are coming on the board and don't know what to do yet, and they can help mentor other people through the process. But I think it's important to recognize that learning theory and how people learn and how uncomfortable it is. Have some empathy with folks about when they're trying to start and learn new things, and that'll help a lot. So here we go, the change cycle. Anytime we have change, there's going to be feelings of loss, of doubt, of insecurity. That's normal, because when people are going through a change, it is a mourning process. So because we're losing something, we're experiencing change is just really uncomfortable. So the first stage is, and different organizations go through this differently. So the process is basically loss, doubt, then all of a sudden things start to look like you're about to turn a corner. And this is the part where a lot of executive directors, development directors, people who are really closely involved, they start to feel hopeful because they can see that things are changing, things are moving. But that's the point where some people are going to realize, oh my goodness, we're going to change, it's scary, and they enter the danger zone, and zoop, they go right up to the beginning again. There's a resistance to it. And when we're trying to get a board engaged in fundraising when they've never been involved in fundraising before, there's that scary part where you can really lose everybody. And I've seen this happen in a lot of organizations. And the difficult part is, once you've been to the danger zone and had to start all over again, it gets harder and harder to get through that danger zone. And I'm not sure what the psychology is about that. If you know some insights, please feel free to share. But that's that danger zone that you want to make sure to get through. A lot of people ask me, well, how do you get through that then? And the biggest part is having a vision, a really strong idea, and somebody who's a big proponent who's going to champion that vision and help people through that process. Another thing is just knowing that it might come, and so then you can prepare people for it. And if people are prepared to feel uncomfortable, they're more likely to be able to ride it out for a little bit longer. And just educating people, you know, this is going to be a temptation. We're going to be tempted to just forget everything we've talked about and go right back up to the beginning again. So if we can warn people that's coming, we can ease that process, as well as providing that really strong vision about what can happen and what the benefits for the organization can be as a result. And that big vision could be the number of people that you're serving in the community. There was a food bank where they had the goal that no person in their county, I think it was, would be hungry. And that changes who you are as an organization and who you operate. Because if you're just trying to, let's say you're serving a small community and providing food, you're just serving that one small portion of the community. But if you look at the whole county, and you look at what's going to have to change, what's going to have to happen if we're going to be able to meet this real demand in our community for food and to make sure that nobody's hungry, having a big vision can help a lot of great things happen, and we're going to talk about that more in a little while. If you want to read more on this, there's a book, Change Cycle. It's available at changecycle.com. And there are folks who are, a lady, one of the contributors is right here in Louisville, and put this together and does work with organizations, mostly for-profits around the country. But definitely something to look up if you want to learn more. The two main things to remember in this area, I think, is that buy-in from the beginning is essential. Having that shared idea of what's going to be different and all that, and knowing ahead of time too that there will be resistance. There will be things that come up. There will be people who say, "Oh, absolutely not." And somehow knowing that ahead of time makes it a little bit easier when we actually experience it. But just because there's resistance doesn't mean you need to stop what you're doing. It just means that maybe a couple people need a little more time to catch up. Maybe there's new people in the future who are going to need to be part of the process to make big things happen. But the resistance by itself is not bad. Now, the DISC model is one model of communication, looking at communication styles, and DISC by itself is not the end-all, be-all. There's a lot of different resources out there that you can use that are about communication styles or how people work. There's, of course, the Myers-Briggs. I know some organizations do I think it's the PI index, the personality index. I'm not sure what that is, but there's a lot of different things out there that you can use. The biggest thing is to recognize that there are differences, and people are different. With one organization I worked with, it was an International Association for Internal Auditors. And you can imagine internal auditors tend to be very detail-oriented, very thoughtful. They need a lot of information and a lot of details to make things happen. So you can imagine my writing for that particular group was a lot more detailed, a lot longer, a lot more informative. But by recognizing the differences in people, we can make sure to, one, in our communications, provide information that's going to help them make a decision, and two, when we're meeting with donors, be able to interact with them appropriately. I don't know if you're familiar with it's the asking styles, which I think is loosely based on DISC. It talks about the different styles of askers and the different styles of donors and how to match those up. Andrea, somebody, and if you want more information on that, I can send you a link. Just send me an email and I'll get you a link for that resource, because they have a little online thing that you can do and program to get all your board members and all that through there. So the biggest thing is to recognize that there are differences. And I won't go into the details on DISC, but the idea is just to know and recognize that there's different ways of thinking. And in fundraising, this is really important too, because we're not our donors. And a lot of times we tend to make decisions based on how we would respond to something, but unless we're looking at data and we've really tested something, it's just a theory. So if you're thinking that, and especially as we have basically 3 different generations in the workplace right now, probably 4 generations of donors, because the builders are still giving. We have the boomer generation, the Xers, and the millennials, and they're all 4 generations giving. So if we write our materials from a millennial perspective, but the majority of our dollars and the majority of our donors are still the builder population, we're really going to be disappointed. So making sure we recognize that we're not our donors. We really need to do research and go by what the data says rather than what we think. And it's a really hard thing to do, but important if we're going to be continuing to grow our donors. The 2 most important things to remember about this is to appreciate the strengths that other people bring. It's easy to get frustrated with people. It's easy to who are different than us. So if we can look at what the strengths are rather than what we see as weaknesses, we can build a much stronger team. And this is among the board, working with our donors. It applies in so many different ways. And also to help others save face, to not put somebody in a position where they're bound to fail. And I just think that's really important, to be able to help recognize how people can contribute and what they can offer. If you want to read more about leadership, the Leadership Challenge by Kuzen Posner is a great resource. It's about a 500-page book, though, I'll warn you. It might be longer than that. But great theory on leadership. And what they've done is broken it down into a 5-stage, basically a 5-stage program, I guess. And the first is to model the way, to do what you expect others to do, and really model that for people. Inspire and help create a shared vision so that everybody feels like they're part of the team, they're part of moving that forward. Challenging the process. Just because something works doesn't mean that it can't be done better. And sometimes we say if it isn't broken, why should we try to fix it? But sometimes there are ways to do things better. So always be thinking, what are the processes? How is it working? How can we do it better? The third is enabling other people to act. It can be really tempting to try to control everything and to try to keep it all together. But the best way to succeed is to expand our workforce as much as we can and give away some of the authority, some of the recognition, some of the requirements, enabling others to act, and creating that environment where they can do that safely and they don't feel like they're going to be dinged for doing something out of the ordinary. The Ritz-Carlton is known really well for this. I think they give their employees, I haven't seen the numbers lately, but I think they give the employees the ability to spend up to $2,000 to make a customer happy. And so instead of having to go up the chain and try to get permission, they can just fix things right away. And it's made some raving fans out of some of the visitors. And finally, the fifth step is encouraging the heart. And this is so, so important, and something that in the nonprofit world we sometimes forget about because we're so busy trying to raise money, fulfill the need in the community. We see everything that still needs to get done, and it can be frustrating at times. But we need to stop and take time to celebrate and take time to acknowledge where we are, how far we've come, and to celebrate together. So after an event, and when I've done this in trainings and live trainings where people are there, I always get a few laughs. But, you know, after an event, we take 5 minutes to say, hey, yay, good job. And then the next morning, it's back to work as usual. We don't even take time to celebrate that, even if it's the greatest event we've ever had. It's on to the next. So build in time with your board, with your committees, with your staff. If you're the fundraiser and you're the only person raising money for the organization, have a little party with yourself if you need to. But find a way to celebrate and be encouraged about how far you've come. And one nice thing to do that I sometimes do well and sometimes not, I keep a record each Friday. I try to write down what are the things that went well this week, what's going good. And so then on days when I might feel discouraged, and we all get there, it's okay, I can go back and read through those and say, oh yeah, I've come a long ways in the last year. And when I was a full-time development director, I would set aside one day each quarter to review how far we'd come on the fundraising plan, were we meeting goals, what do we need to do differently. But it was really just that day to reflect on what had happened, celebrate the things that are going well, and then fix the things that weren't. But by having that one intentional day of planning every quarter, that's one of the things that I think really contributed a lot to our going from raising under $200,000 a year to over $1.2 million a year. And that was just over a 3-year period. But being strategic can make a big difference. You might say, well, I don't have time to do that. I say you don't have time to not do that, because you need to make sure that your time is being really well spent. But I'm getting a little off topic, so just one of those topics I get a little excited about. But the two main things to remember: assume, and I talked about this earlier, assume that everyone wants what's best for the organization. And having that assumption going in, it gives people something that they want to live up to. So, and that can help the organization go a lot further. And focus on those win-win outcomes, things that are going to be a win all around. It's not about being better than somebody. It's not about winning. It's on creating those things that are most win-win for everybody. And that's from Steve Covey, but it's one of those things that a lot of the leadership books will talk about. The marketing knowledge I won't spend a whole bunch of time on, but basically people need to know about you if they're going to give to you. And greater connections with people typically mean higher giving. So it's a base of knowledge that we should have, be able to put together a marketing plan so that we can get in front of the right people. And this isn't about marketing to everybody. It's not a general, let's just throw spaghetti at the wall kind of thing. It's a real focused effort on identifying who are the right audiences that you need to get in front of and how are you going to get there. And when you're engaging your board, recognizing how your board can help you get in front of the right people. So, really important. And of course, fundraising, we need to know about that. But as it relates to the board, your board can't make good fundraising decisions if they don't have good information. And as the fundraising professional, or even as the person who's tasked with fundraising, your job is to make sure that they have the information that they need to make good decisions. This doesn't mean trying to do a 5-day fundraising 101 session in an hour. People will go away feeling like they've just had a fire hose in their mouth for an hour. So pulling out the relevant nuggets of information that they need, things like return on investment of different fundraising strategies, things like the success percentages of personal one-on-one asks versus a direct mail appeal in the mail, and giving them that information so they can make good decisions about how they're going to be involved. And then also recognizing that what's ideal is not necessarily what reality. So when we read in books, when you hear on webinars, hey, this is how it should be, sometimes that just isn't realistic. And recognizing that and adapting for where you are and where the organization is, and figuring out where the greatest mesh is for that. And I've talked with a lot of people who've gotten really frustrated trying to create ideal situations. And there are just very few, and they're very far between. So if we can look at what the reality is now, look at minor adjustments that we can make over time. It's sometimes a long-term commitment, and sometimes you can make a difference in an organization, and sometimes you can't. And there's a little bit of an art, I guess, in recognizing when to keep on plugging away and when to step away. But by recognizing that the ideal really doesn't exist in most organizations, that can help us, I think, work through some things that we might have some trouble doing otherwise. And I already talked about the learning theories, so we'll get more into that. But here are our 7 steps. And I talked about them a little bit at the beginning. And yes, okay. So the first step is creating that compelling vision, that idea, that big idea that the board can embrace. And hopefully for most organizations, they already have something that is a compelling vision. And it's about making a big impact on the community that you're serving. So hopefully you have something like that. If not, there's some different vision exercises that you can do with your board. And that's actually one of the exercises that I've included in the 7-module series that I put together. All of these have their own module. So there are programs out there that you can find, and there might be something that you already have that you can adapt on how to do that with your board so that they feel like they're part of it. And for some organizations, you can skip this part because you already have it down. But that compelling vision is really, really important. And then drafting that simple fundraising plan. And basically what that needs to include is a couple things. First is outlining what your market is, what your media is, and what your message is. So the market is who you're talking to. The media is what you're going to use to get the word out. Like social media would just be one option, one media that you could use to promote your message, or to promote your, and this is a marketing / fundraising plan. So the media is what you use to get the message out, and the message is of course what you're saying. And the message might vary slightly from audience to audience. It's like looking at a picture from a different perspective, or looking at a sculpture from a different perspective. If you stand right in front of it, you're going to see one thing. If you're to the left, you're going to see a slightly different view. If you're to the right, you're going to see a slightly different view. So you might change your messaging slightly for each audience based on what's going to be most important to them, because not everybody needs to know everything, and they'll be a little overwhelmed if you try to pack everything into one program. So first of all, identifying that. So what's your market, what's your media, what's your message? The second thing to identify is what I call the you can call it a sales funnel or a fundraising funnel or whatever you like, but there's 3 different levels to that. The entry level is how are you building awareness? So how are you getting in front of these people that you've identified that you want to be in front of? That's your market. The market is who you're in front of. So how are you going to get in front of those people? That's the awareness. The second step is with that audience, how are you going to build engagement with them? So how are you staying in touch with them throughout the year? Could be printed newsletters, email newsletters. And if you're not doing anything in print anymore, I encourage you to reconsider that. I really encourage you to do things in print. Because with email, it's really easy to delete. Not all the emails get through. Just a note. So the second level is that engagement, and the third level is asking. Because if we don't ask, people assume that the money part is already taken care of. So I'm going to repeat that. If you don't ask, people assume that the money part is all taken care of. So that's your simple fundraising plan right there, that market media message and that awareness, engagement, and asking. Third is developing your messaging, and that's your case statement. That's the story that you're going to carry out to people. Creating the materials your board can use. I call this a pitch kit. Typically what I include in that is the case statement, a couple letter samples, a couple email samples, maybe even some social media posts about the organization, some donation forms that they can copy or just have on hand if they're going to be talking to people. But this accomplishes 2 goals. One, gives board members things that they can use, and it also takes away an excuse, well, I don't know what to say. So providing that information up front is a good way to do that. And then having a fundraising planning session with your board where you share the information about things like return on investment of fundraising strategies, where you share the effectiveness of different types of asks. You talk about who they know in the community, where their strengths are, what they're good at, and then put together a board member fundraising plan from there that everybody can fill out and return. And then again, with the follow-up, that helps smooth the way and smooth the process. And then, of course, providing the training to your board on how to ask. Now, keep in mind that not everybody on your board is going to be asking for money, but everybody on the board can be involved in fundraising in some way. But if everybody's gotten a little bit of training, they'll feel more comfortable introducing people, knowing the kind of experience that their friends are going to have if they end up being asked. And sometimes the people who are most resistant to asking for gifts are those people who get most excited about it, and when you're sitting down with the donor, they rush into the ask because they're just so excited, and then they see how excited their friend is about what's happening with the organization and about the program that you're talking about. So just because somebody says they don't want to ask doesn't mean they don't have to be a part of this, but it should, everybody should go through it just so they're comfortable with the process. And then, of course, the 7th step, this is where we lose board members if we're not, and this alludes back to the learning styles. If we don't check in to make sure that things are going okay, it's really easy for them to get off track and distracted and not do the things that they really want to do and that they said they do. So if we can check in, it sends the message that what we're asking for is important, and it also makes sure that we're there as guides, as mentors, as trainers, whatever you want to call it. Maybe you want to call yourself a coach for the board members. Whatever you want to call it, you're there for them to answer questions, to provide resources, to connect them with people if they have questions. But with board members, there's so many other things that are competing for their time. There's so many things that are competing for their attention. So if we can make it easy, provide the information that they need, and provide the support that they need, we can make sure that they're successful and that we're successful as an organization and reaching our financial goals. So those are the 7 steps to think about. And in the materials that I've put together, I don't have a particular slide about this. I've just been working on finalizing the details, but I'm real excited about it. Eventually, this product is going to sell for $197. But because you're part of the forward team, so to speak, what I'm going to be doing is recording the modules over a 7-week program. Everything will be recorded, and at the end of the program, you'll get not only the recordings on resource CDs, as well as the materials that I'll be emailing you through the time. I'll put that on a CD for you and send it to you, along with the binder of all the printed materials, so you'll have that as a resource for moving forward. And since you're part of that, I'm going to be doing that for $97. That'll include shipping. So you'll get all 7 modules of the live training. I'll be adding in some Q&A time at the end of each of those sessions that will be a bonus for you for being a part of the development process, so to speak. So we'll have that Q&A time, and then you'll get all of the resources and all of the materials in a binder with your CD of materials at the end. And that's including the visioning training session with your board. It includes the materials for your fundraising planning session, or the board asking training, as well as a sample pitch kit with information that you can easily copy, paste, adapt to your organization, and specific trainings on what a simple fundraising plan can look like if you happen to not have one already. Got a 1-page fundraising plan format that you can use to throw something together really quickly, as well as all the other information you need to be successful. But really excited about this. Like I said, it will be eventually $197 for the full program, but for you guys it's $97, and it starts on September 29th. It's a Monday. It's just a couple weeks from now. So here we go. And since we do have a couple more minutes, I'll go through a couple things really quickly related to the fundraising plan and the case statement, and then I'll close up. And then if you have any questions, feel free to email me, to call. My phone number, I believe, is on all of the emails that are sent out, and I can get those questions answered for you. But with your fundraising plan, you want to definitely include specific goals, and you want to break down the projects into month-by-month activities so that people can clearly see what's going to be done each month. And you'll do that both for your own plan, but more importantly for the aspects that the board is involved in, so that they have a clear idea of everything that's happening. And it gives you your talking points for every board meeting when you're talking about fundraising, because if you're not talking about fundraising at every meeting, it sends the message that it's not important. So if that's not on your agenda for every meeting, go ahead and make a note to add that right now. It can be even just 5 minutes, but having that on there is really important. Your case statement includes both the story and the facts. Typically, the outline covers something like you open with a story, then have the need statement, which is basically why is what you do needed in the community, and then what is your organization doing to address that need, and why is your organization the best one to do it. So that's a brief overview of the case statement. But basically, you want to include the story for the emotional appeal, and then the facts as a backup for those people who want those facts to just know that. But most people, like I said, make a decision to give based on an emotional appeal, and then look for the facts to back it up. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. Here's my contact information right here, and I'll be sending an email to everybody who registered with a link to this recording, and my contact information, so you can let me know what questions you have. And this is a training that it's in process. I'm making it better, and I'll be presenting it a couple more times over the next month. So if you could also let me know, one, the best thing you got out of this, and then two, if you have a suggestion for improvement, I'd love that too. So again, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to connecting with everybody in the near future. Thanks. Have a good one.